She sought shelter in the lonely farmer's barn after a robbery, and together, they overcame trauma and found love. In the harsh landscapes of 1880s Wyoming, where survival often meant facing your demons alone, two broken souls are about to discover that healing doesn't always come in solitude. This is the story of how a violent encounter on a dusty road led to an unexpected refuge, and how two wounded hearts found strength in each other's pain. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the Wyoming territory as the stagecoach rolled along the rutted dirt road between Cheyenne and Laramie. Inside, 23-year-old Emma Heartfelt clutched her small traveling bag, watching the endless prairie grass sway in the wind through the dusty window. She was returning from visiting her sister in Denver, carrying what little money she had left after paying for her father's funeral expenses. The driver's sudden shout shattered the afternoon quiet. "Stand and deliver." Emma's blood turned cold as three masked men on horseback surrounded the coach, their revolvers gleaming in the sunlight. The lead bandit, a tall man with cruel eyes, visible above his bandana, gestured with his weapon. "Everyone out, now." Emma's hands trembled as she stepped down from the coach. The other passenger, an elderly merchant, was already emptying his pockets with shaking fingers. The driver sat frozen on his perch, hands raised high. "You, there girl," the leader growled, pointing his gun at Emma. "That bag. Hand it over, please," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's all I have." My father, just a crack of his hand across her face, sent her stumbling backward. "I don't care about your sob story." As she fell to her knees, the bag torn from her grasp, Emma felt something inside her shatter. The man's laughter echoed in her ears as they rode away with everything she owned, leaving her with nothing but the terror that now lived in her chest, like a wild animal clawing to get out. The merchant helped her to her feet, but Emma barely felt his touch. The world had become distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. Even when the stagecoach resumed its journey, she couldn't stop shaking. When they reached the next town, Emma couldn't bring herself to get back on. The thought of being trapped in that small space again, vulnerable and helpless, made her stomach churn. Instead, she found herself walking aimlessly through the dusty streets as the evening fell, her mind replaying the robbery over and over. The October night grew cold, and Emma's thin dress offered little protection against the prairie wind. She had walked for hours without direction, driven by a desperate need to keep moving, to stay ahead of the fear that threatened to consume her. When she finally stopped, exhausted and disoriented, she found herself at the edge of a small ranch. In the moonlight, she could make out a modest farmhouse, a barn, and corrals that held a few horses. The barn door hung slightly open, and without thinking, Emma slipped inside. The smell of hay and horses was comforting somehow, earthy and real, in a way that anchored her spinning thoughts. She collapsed into a pile of straw in the corner, finally allowing the tears to come. They fell silently at first, then in great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her father, for her stolen money, for the innocence that had been ripped away on that dusty road. Most of all, she cried from exhaustion and the overwhelming feeling that she was utterly alone in the world. As dawn approached, Emma finally fell into a fitful sleep, curled up in the hay like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Jacob Mitchell rose before dawn, as he had every day for the past 5 years since settling on this small piece of Wyoming rangeland. At 35, he was a man shaped by loss and solitude, his weathered hands telling the story of hard work and harder choices. He had come here to escape the ghosts of his past, the wife and child he'd lost to cholera back in Missouri, the war that had left scars deeper than the visible ones on his left shoulder. As he approached the barn to tend to his horses, he heard something that made him freeze, the soft sound of someone crying. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, then stopped. The sobs were unmistakably feminine, filled with a grief that resonated uncomfortably with his own buried pain. Jacob pushed the barn door open slowly and saw her, young woman with dark hair tangled with hay, her blue dress torn and dirty. She was awake now, startled by his presence, and the fear in her green eyes made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Please," Emma gasped, scrambling backward into the hay. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trespass. I'll go." "I just need it easy," Jacob said softly, his deep voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. He was a tall man, from years of ranch work, with dark hair and eyes that held their own shadows. "You're not in trouble. What's your name?" Emma hesitated, studying his face. There was kindness there beneath the weathered exterior, but 5 years of living alone had taught Jacob to be cautious. Still, something about her obvious distress stirred protective instincts he thought he'd buried with his family. Emma, she whispered finally. Emma Hartwell. I'm Jacob Mitchell. This is my land. He kept his distance, sensing her skittishness. What happened to you? The question opened the floodgates. Between broken sobs, Emma told him about the robbery, about losing everything, about walking through the night, because she couldn't bear to feel trapped again. Jacob listened without interruption, his jaw tightening as she described the bandits' cruelty. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Jacob understood the look in her eyes, that hollow, haunted expression of someone whose world had been shattered in an instant. He'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. You hungry? He asked finally. Emma blinked, surprised by the simple question. She nodded hesitantly. Come on up to the house then. I'll fix you something to eat. I can't pay you, Emma said quickly. They took everything. Jacob's expression softened slightly. Didn't ask you to. If you're enjoying the video so far, a like and subscribe to the channel really helps me out. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Emma felt a strange mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. The morning sun was painting the prairie gold, and for the first time since the robbery, she felt something other than pure terror, tiny flicker of hope that maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. The farmhouse was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and a stone fireplace that spoke of comfortable solitude. Jacob moved efficiently around the small kitchen, preparing eggs and bacon while coffee brewed on the stove. Emma sat at the wooden table, suddenly aware of how she must look after a night in the barn. There's a wash basin and clean towel on the porch, Jacob said without looking up, as if reading her thoughts. Take your time. When Emma returned, feeling more human after washing the dirt and tears from her face, Jacob had set out a plate of food that looked like a feast to her empty stomach. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, while he sat across from her with his own breakfast. Those men, Jacob said eventually. You get a good look at them. Emma's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Why? Sheriff Brennan's a friend of mine. Good man. He'd want to know about this. No. Emma's voice was sharp with panic. Please. No. I just want to forget it happened. Jacob studied her face, recognizing the fear that went deeper than simple reluctance. All right. But Emma, they'll likely hit other folks if they're still in the area. I know. I just ... I can't. Not yet. Jacob nodded slowly. He understood better than she knew about wanting to bury the past and pretend it never happened. Where were you headed? Got family somewhere? Emma's laugh was bitter. I was going home to Laramie. But home is just an empty house now that my father's gone. My sister's in Denver, but I can't afford passage. And even if I could, she shuddered at the thought of getting back on a stagecoach. You could stay here for a while, Jacob heard himself saying, surprising them both. Until you figure out what you want to do. Emma stared at him. I couldn't impose, got a spare room used to be ... He stopped himself. It's not an imposition. Truth is, it might be nice to have someone to talk to besides the horses. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own, that made Emma's decision for her. Just for a few days, she said quietly. Until I can get my bearings. Jacob nodded, already wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But as he looked at Emma, looked at her for the first time, he saw something in her green eyes that reminded him of his own. Reflection 5 years ago. Sometimes, he thought, people found each other when they needed it most, even if they didn't know they were looking. 2 weeks passed like whispered prayers on the Wyoming wind. Emma had settled into the rhythm of Jacob's simple life with a carefulness that spoke of deeper healing than just physical rest. She insisted on earning her keep, helping with meals and mending, though her hands still trembled when unexpected sounds broke the prairie silence. Jacob, for his part, found himself looking forward to the sound of her voice in the morning. The way she hummed softly while preparing coffee, the gradual return of color to her pale cheeks. He'd lived in solitude so long that he'd forgotten how healing simple human companionship could be. You don't have to do that, Jacob said one afternoon, finding Emma mucking out the horse stalls. The October air was crisp, and she'd tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, her sleeves rolled up despite the chill. I want to help, Emma replied, not looking up from her work. You've been so kind, and I feel useless just sitting around. Jacob leaned against the stall door, watching her careful movements. Nothing useless about healing. Takes time. Emma paused, her grip tightening on the pitchfork handle. Do you think it ever really stops? The way it plays over and over in your head. The question hung in the air between them. Jacob was quiet for so long that Emma glanced up, finding him staring out at the distant mountains with that faraway look she'd come to recognize. "I lost my wife and daughter to cholera 5 years ago," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Caroline was pregnant when she got sick. Our son, ... He never even took a breath." Emma's heart clenched at the raw pain in his voice. She set down the pitchfork and moved closer, her earlier fears forgotten in the face of his grief. "I blamed myself," Jacob continued. "Thought if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, if I'd been a better husband, a better provider." The thoughts still come, especially at night. But they're not as sharp now. Time doesn't heal everything, but it does soften the edges. "Is that why you came here? To escape the memories?" Jacob nodded. "Thought I could outrun them. Turns out you carry them with you wherever you go. But being here, working with my hands, it helps. The land doesn't judge. It just is." They stood in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Emma surprised them both by reaching out and briefly touching his arm. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched another person since the robbery. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "Caroline, and your son. They were lucky to be loved by you." Jacob's throat tightened at her words. He'd spent 5 years convinced he'd failed them, and hearing Emma's simple acceptance of his love rather than his guilt cracked something open inside his chest. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace after dinner, Emma found herself really looking at Jacob for the first time. The flickering flames highlighted the strong lines of his face, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the gentle strength in his hands as he whittled a piece of wood. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, soft and steady in a way that made her feel safe. "What are you making?" she asked, curling her feet under her in the wooden chair. "Nothing fancy, just helps me think." He held up the emerging shape of a small horse. "Habit I picked up during the war. You were a soldier, Union Army, 4th Infantry." His knife paused in its carving. "Learned real quick that sometimes the best thing you can do is keep your hands busy when your mind wants to wander into dark places. Leave a comment about what you think of this story so far." Emma understood that wisdom all too well. "I used to embroider," she said quietly. "Little flowers and birds on handkerchiefs and pillowcases. My mother taught me before she died. After the robbery, I kept thinking about how those bandits destroyed that too, since they took the bag with all my sewing supplies." "What kind of flowers?" Jacob asked, genuine interest in his voice. Emma's face brightened slightly. "Violets were my favorite. They're delicate, but hardy. They can grow in the most unexpected places if they get a little care." Jacob smiled a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Sounds like they have good instincts for survival." The comment made Emma blush, and she realized with surprise that the tightness in her chest had eased somewhat. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about the robbery every moment. Instead, she was thinking about how Jacob's smile made her feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. As October deepened into November, their conversations grew longer and more intimate. Jacob spoke about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, his dreams of having children who would run through fields of corn. Emma shared memories of her father, a school teacher who would fill their house with books and laughter until illness took him. One evening, during a particularly fierce autumn storm, Emma woke from a nightmare with a cry that brought Jacob running from his room. He found her sitting up in bed, shaking and disoriented. "It's all right," he said from the doorway. "Careful not to come too close. You're safe. It was just a dream." Emma looked around the small room, slowly remembering where she was. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning illuminated the prairie in stark flashes that reminded her too much of muzzle flares. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Don't apologize. You want some tea? Might help you settle." Emma nodded gratefully, and soon they were sitting at the kitchen table, while rain drummed on the roof. Jacob had lit a lamp that cast a warm circle of light around them, making the rest of the world seem far away. "The dreams," Emma said eventually. "They're always the same. I'm back on that road, but this time I can't run. I'm frozen, and they just keep coming closer." Jacob's hands tightened around his cup. "I used to dream about the fever tent. Caroline, calling my name, but I could never reach her in time. How did you make them stop?" "They haven't stopped completely, but they've changed. Sometimes now I dream about the good times, her laugh, the way she sang while she cooked." He looked at Emma across the table. "I think healing isn't about forgetting the bad things. It's about making room for the good things too." Emma met his gaze, and something passed between them in that moment, understanding deeper than words. She realized that somewhere in these quiet weeks, her feelings for Jacob had grown beyond gratitude. The way he looked at her, as if she was something precious rather than broken, made her heart race in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Jacob," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. He reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too." The simple admission hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the circle of lamplight, two wounded souls had found something worth fighting for. December arrived with a vengeance, blanketing the prairie in snow and forcing Emma and Jacob into even closer quarters. What might have been awkward had become natural. They moved around each other in the small farmhouse with an intimacy born of shared grief and growing affection. Emma had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months now, and the frightened, broken woman who had sought shelter in Jacob's barn was slowly being replaced by someone stronger. Her nightmares had become less frequent, and she no longer jumped at every unexpected sound. More importantly, she had begun to laugh against Antidiv at first, then with genuine joy that lit up her entire face. Jacob, meanwhile, was discovering that caring for someone else was awakening parts of himself he thought had died with Carolyn's presence, had breathed life back into the farmhouse, and more surprisingly, into his own heart. One snowy evening, as they sat before the fire, reading from one of Emma's father's books that Jacob had ridden to Laramie to retrieve from her old house, Emma looked up to find him watching her, with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked softly. "You're beautiful," Jacob said simply. "I know that's not. We haven't talked about, but I needed you to know." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. Over the months, she had noticed how Jacob looked at her not with a predatory assessment that made her skin crawl, but with genuine admiration and tenderness that made her feel treasured. "Jacob," she said, setting the book aside, "I care about you more than I probably should." "Why shouldn't you?" Emma's old fears rose to the surface. "Because I'm damaged. Because I wake up screaming. Because sometimes I still can't breathe when I think about what happened." Jacob set down his own book and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Emma, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued gently, "Those men took your money and your peace of mind for a while, but they didn't take you. You're still here, still fighting, still capable of kindness and laughter and love. That's not damaged, that's strong." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see you every day. I see how you gentle the horses, how you hum while you cook, how you listen to my stories about Caroline without jealousy. You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known." Emma reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw from an old war wound. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," Jacob said, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "We saved each other." The kiss that followed was soft and tentative, full of question and answer both. When they broke apart, Emma's face was flushed, but her eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like hope. "I love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it's too soon, and I know I'm still healing, but I love you, Jacob Mitchell." Jacob's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I love you too, Emma Hartwell." Have 4 weeks. Now, if you've enjoyed this story, like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As winter deepened, their relationship bloomed like flowers in unexpected soil. Jacob was patient with Emma's occasional setbacks, holding her through nightmares and celebrating small victories, like the day she rode into town with him without fear. Emma, in turn, helped Jacob open his heart to the possibility of a future he'd never dared to imagine. One February morning, as they worked together to repair a fence damaged by the winter storms, Jacob cleared his throat nervously. "Emma, I've been thinking." "About what?" she asked, struggling with a stubborn fence post. "About us. About the future." He moved to help her with the post, but his eyes were on her face. "I know we haven't been together long, and I know you might want to go back to Denver to be near your sister, but... Emma's heart began to race. But I'd like you to stay. Permanently, as my wife, if you'll have me." Emma dropped her hammer, staring at him in shock. "Jacob, are you? I'm asking you to marry me," he said, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know I don't have much to offer except a small ranch and a man who loves you more than his next breath." But Emma silenced him with a kiss that tasted of tears and laughter and promises. When they broke apart, she was beaming. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in town the following month, with Sheriff Brennan and his wife as witnesses. Emma wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Jacob had never looked more handsome than he did, standing at the altar with tears in his own eyes. As spring arrived and the prairie burst into bloom, Emma and Jacob settled into married life with the contentment of people who had found their home in each other. They planted a garden together, expanded the horse operation, and began making plans for the future. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma placed her hand over her still flat stomach and shared the news that would complete their healing. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. Jacob's intake of breath was sharp with joy and wonder. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair as gratitude overwhelmed him. "I used to think God had forgotten about me," he whispered. "But maybe he was just waiting for the right time to send me you." Emma smiled, thinking about the terrified woman who had stumbled into his barn that October night. That woman could never have imagined this moment sitting on a porch with a man who loved her completely, carrying their child, surrounded by the quiet beauty of a life built from ashes. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, taking in a stranger. Jacob's answer came without hesitation. "Never. You were never a stranger, Emma. You were just love that hadn't found its way home yet." As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Emma leaned against her husband's shoulder and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. Two broken people had found each other in the darkness and discovered that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unlikely places, like violets blooming wild on the prairie. Hardy and delicate and absolutely perfect, their story became the stuff of local legend, the woman who sought shelter and the man who offered sanctuary, both finding healing in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and hope. Years later, as their children played in the fields where Emma had once walked, alone and afraid, she would tell them that love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it comes disguised as necessity, grows in unexpected soil, and blooms when you least expect it. What did you think of Emma and Jacob's story? Which part touched you the most? Leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts and connecting with viewers who appreciate these tales of resilience and love. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any future stories. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin in the dark.